John had been away for just 3 days, a quick trip to visit his sister out of state. He had left his farm in its usual quiet solitude, nestled just beyond the edge of the HOA community that had grown up around his land over the years. The Ao farm was his sanctuary, a patch of earth he'd nurtured with sweat and patience. But as his car rolled up the long dirt driveway, an unsettling sight caught his eye. Bright orange "For Rent" signs stood planted stubbornly in the front yard. John's heart lurched. That wasn't possible. He slowed the car and squinted. The signs bore Karen's name, the neighbor from 2 properties down. Karen, with her perfectly manicured nails and sharp tongue, the woman who'd never liked him, always made little digs about his old-fashioned lifestyle. But renting out his farm? Without his permission? He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel. A couple of unfamiliar faces were walking around the barn, unloading equipment. They looked up, startled by his sudden arrival. One of them, a burly man with a worn baseball cap, hurried over. "Hey, are you the owner?" "I thought Karen had the rights to rent this place," the man said, confused. John's jaw tightened. "She doesn't. This is my property." The man exchanged uncertain glances with his companion. "That's what Karen said." John's blood ran cold. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Inside the farmhouse, the atmosphere was thick with tension. He found Karen standing by the kitchen window, phone in hand, as if she'd been waiting for him. Her lips curled into a knowing smirk. "Welcome back, John," she said sweetly. But her eyes glinted with something cold, calculating. "I thought it was time someone put this farm to good use." John's voice was low but firm. "You rented out my farm? Without telling me?" Karen shrugged as if it was no big deal. "You're hardly here. I thought the community might appreciate a bit of activity around here. Besides, I have papers that say I can." John's pulse quickened. "Show me." She tapped her phone and slid a document across the counter. His eyes scanned the screen, some kind of rental agreement. But the signatures were faint and suspicious. Something felt off. A sudden knock at the door startled them both. John opened it to find the HOA property manager standing there, a worried look on his face. "John, I need to talk to you," he said quietly. "There's something about those rental papers. They don't look right." John closed the door and turned back to Karen. "What exactly have you done?" Karen's smile vanished. "Look, I'm not the bad guy here. If you don't want renters, maybe you should have been more careful about protecting your property." John clenched his fists. The fight was only beginning. That night, as he sat in the dim light of his living room, John's mind raced. He dialed a number he hadn't called in years, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. But even as he spoke, a shadow of doubt crept in. The documents, the strange renters, Karen's cold demeanor. Was there something deeper behind this? Was this just a simple case of boundary crossing, or was Karen playing a dangerous game with more sinister stakes? His phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "Be careful who you trust. Karen's not acting alone." John stared at the screen, heart pounding. This was no longer just about a farm. It was about trust, betrayal, and a fight that could change everything he held dear. John spent a restless night, tossing and turning in his old farmhouse bed. The chilling message from the unknown number echoed in his mind. Karen's not acting alone. Who else could be involved? And what was their endgame? The morning sun barely warmed the chilled air as John made his way over to Karen's house. His footsteps were heavy with a mixture of anger and caution. The neighborhood looked deceptively peaceful, but John knew better now. Beneath the surface, tensions simmered like a volcano ready to erupt. Karen's front door swung open before he could even knock. She stood there, impeccably dressed, her face an unreadable mask. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, John," she said, voice silky but sharp, "I was wondering when you'd come by." John stepped inside the immaculate living room, eyes scanning for any sign of deceit. "We need to talk about the farm." Karen leaned casually against the kitchen counter. "I don't see what there is to talk about. I have a lease agreement signed and notarized." John's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. "That agreement isn't valid. You forged my signature." Karen's smile twisted into a cold sneer. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof, or are you just threatening me?" John's fists clenched. "I'm not here to threaten. I want to settle this legally." "But you've crossed a line, Karen. Renting my property without permission is illegal and dangerous." Her eyes flickered with something darker, something that made John take a subtle step back. "You don't understand the situation," she said, voice dropping low. "I did what I had to do. This neighborhood's changing. You're stuck in the past, clinging to your farm like it's sacred. But people need housing, renters, business. I'm just trying to survive." John's mind reeled. Was this just a greedy neighbor, or was there desperation behind her ruthless actions? Before he could ask more, Karen's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. John took a deep breath, determined to push for answers. "Who else is involved, Karen? The message I got last night said you're not acting alone." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she held her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about." John's voice hardened. "Don't lie. This isn't just about you or me anymore. It's bigger. And if you don't come clean, I'll find out. The hard way." For a tense moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then Karen laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Fine," she said, stepping closer. "You want the truth? There are people in the HOA who want this farm gone. Developers who see dollar signs where you see dirt and crops. They're behind this, and I'm just their pawn." John's blood ran cold. If Karen's words were true, this was no longer a neighborly dispute. It was a dangerous game of power and greed. His entire life's work was on the line. "Why tell me this now?" John asked, suspicion burning in his chest. "Because you're stubborn," Karen replied, with a sly grin. "And because if you don't fight, they'll take everything, including your reputation." John swallowed hard. He knew Karen's threats were real, but backing down was never an option. Before he left, Karen's parting words lingered in the air. "Watch your back, John. This is just the beginning." Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood. John's mind raced with questions. Who in the HOA was involved? How deep did the conspiracy go? And what could he do to protect the farm and himself before it was too late? He glanced back at Karen's house, her silhouette framed in the doorway. The cold fire in her eyes promised a battle far fiercer than John had ever imagined. John turned and walked away, steeling himself for the fight ahead. This confrontation was only the opening move, and he was determined not to lose. Night had fallen, wrapping the neighborhood in a quiet darkness that seemed thicker than usual. John sat in his living room, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across piles of papers scattered before him. He'd spent the day piecing together scraps of information, HOA meeting minutes, property deeds, and a handful of emails between Karen and various unknown contacts. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to tell him he was onto something far bigger than a simple dispute. His phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. "Meet me at the community park. Midnight. Come alone." John's fingers trembled as he debated. Was this a trap? A threat? Or a chance to uncover the truth? His instincts told him the farm wasn't the only thing at stake. Against his better judgment, he grabbed his jacket and headed out. The park was nearly deserted, the bull playground swaying gently in the night breeze. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a wary expression. "You're John," she said softly. He nodded. "Who are you?" "Call me Emily. I used to work for the HOA, but I quit when things started getting dirty." John's heart raced. "What do you know about Karen?" Emily glanced nervously around. "More than I should. Karen didn't act alone. There's a group within the HOA pushing to take over properties like yours using forged documents, fake leases, even threats. Karen's their front woman." John swallowed hard. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you're the only one standing in their way, and because Karen's about to make a big move. If you don't stop her, the farm, and this entire community could be lost." John's mind spun. "What kind of move?" Emily hesitated, then handed him a small USB drive. "Proof. Emails, altered property records, payments. If this gets into the right hands, it could bring the whole scheme down. But be careful. People here won't want this getting out." John felt the weight of the drive in his palm, a tiny lifeline in the growing darkness. Suddenly, the faint crunch of footsteps made them both freeze. From the shadows stepped a tall man, his face half hidden by a cap. "Emily," he said coldly, voice dripping with menace. "You shouldn't be here." Emily's eyes flicked to John. "Go! Now!" John didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the street, heart pounding in his chest as the man's footsteps thundered behind him. He glanced back once, seeing Emily vanish into the shadows. Safe under the streetlights, John paused to catch his breath. His phone buzzed again. Trust no one. They're watching. Back at home, John plugged the USB into his laptop. Files filled with correspondence, forged signatures, and financial transactions appeared before him, damning evidence of the corruption poisoning the HOA. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. His mind raced. If this evidence got out, Karen wouldn't just lose the farm. She and her backers could face serious consequences. But exposing them meant risking everything. John leaned back, exhaustion and adrenaline swirling inside him. The shadows were closing in, but now he had a weapon. Tomorrow he'd start building his case. Tonight, he would prepare for the storm. The sus. Next morning, John found himself pacing in the small meeting room of the HOA clubhouse. His mind was a swirl of doubts and plans. The evidence Emily had given him was explosive, but exposing it meant stepping into a web of danger he barely understood. He needed allies, but whom could he trust? The door creaked open and the HOA president Margaret stepped inside. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a steely expression. "John," she said, folding her arms. "I heard you've been asking questions." John nodded cautiously. "I'm trying to protect my property. Karen's renting it out illegally, and I have proof there's a bigger scheme at play." Margaret's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "I'm aware, and I want to help." John's heart leapt. Finally, someone on his side. But as Margaret spoke, John caught subtle signs of something else. Hesitation, a flicker of unease. Was she truly his ally, or was there more beneath her polished exterior? Over the next few days, Margaret provided access to HOA files John couldn't reach alone. She arranged discreet meetings with board members willing to listen. Together, they uncovered disturbing patterns, falsified records, unauthorized sales, and suspicious deposits linked to Karen and unnamed investors. Yet, shadows lingered. Margaret often disappeared during key moments, returning with vague explanations. One evening, John caught her speaking hurriedly on the phone, her voice low and urgent. When he tried to ask, she brushed him off. A creeping suspicion gnawed at John. Was Margaret involved in the corruption or trying to protect him from deeper dangers? One night, after a long day of research, John followed Margaret as she left the clubhouse. She didn't go home. Instead, she met with a sharply dressed man in a secluded parking lot. Their whispered conversation was heated. Words like deadline, cover-up, and stakes drifted toward John. His chest tightened. He pulled back into the shadows, feeling the weight of betrayal settle like ice. Back home, John confronted Margaret the next day. "I saw you last night." "Who was that man?" Margaret's composure cracked for a moment. Then she sighed, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "John, you don't understand how deep this goes," she said quietly. "I'm caught in it too. There are people here who would destroy the community to make a quick profit. I've been trying to protect you and the rest of us." John stared at her, torn between trust and doubt. "Then help me stop this," he pleaded. "We need to expose Karen and whoever is backing her." Margaret nodded slowly. "I will, but be careful. The more we dig, the more dangerous it becomes. You're not just fighting a neighbor. You're fighting powerful interests that won't hesitate to silence anyone in their way." The warning hung heavy in the air. John realized this wasn't just about his farm anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the community, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. The courthouse was packed. Every seat in the gallery was taken, and whispers buzzed like electricity in the air. John sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clenched tightly around a stack of documents, the result of weeks of digging, sleepless nights, and whispered warnings. Across the room, Karen sat with her lawyer, her expression cool and defiant. Her eyes locked onto John's with a mixture of challenge and disdain. The judge called the courtroom to order. "We are here today to hear the case of John Matthews versus Karen Ellis regarding property rights and unauthorized rental activities." John's lawyer began presenting the evidence. Forged signatures, falsified HOA records, emails exposing the conspiracy, and testimonies from witnesses like Emily. The tension in the room grew with every detail revealed. Karen's lawyer countered, aggressively, attempting to discredit John's evidence as fabrications and hearsay. He portrayed Karen as a victim of misunderstanding and jealousy, weaving a story that twisted facts and blurred lines. John's stomach churned as doubts crept in. The defense seemed skilled at sowing confusion, casting shadows over truths he had fought so hard to uncover. Then came the surprise moment. The courtroom doors opened, and a middle-aged man stepped in. Mark, a former HOA employee who had vanished months earlier under mysterious circumstances. The judge called for a brief recess to allow the new witness to prepare. When court resumed, Mark took the stand. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed fear. "I worked with Karen," he said. "I saw the forged documents. I saw the money changing hands. I was pressured to stay silent. But I can't anymore." He handed over a series of internal memos and recorded conversations that corroborated John's claims. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Karen's face paled, her confident facade cracking. John felt a surge of hope, but the fight wasn't over. During closing arguments, Karen's lawyer lashed out, accusing John of harassment and paranoia. The judge listened intently, the weight of the decision heavy in the room. Finally, the judge's gavel struck. Based on the evidence presented, this court rules in favor of John Matthews. The rental agreement signed by Karen Ellis is invalid, and all unauthorized tenants must vacate immediately. Further investigation into HOA corruption will be pursued. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Karen stood, her face a mask of fury and defeat, but before she could speak, she turned and stalked out. John exhaled deeply, relief washing over him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, questions fired. John answered with quiet resolve, knowing the battle was won, but the war far from over. The victory in court felt like a storm breaking, but John knew better than to celebrate just yet. Karen's defeat was only the beginning. The real fight, the fight to uncover who else was pulling the strings behind the scenes, was just heating up. Back at his farmhouse, John sat with Margaret, the HOA president who'd become an uneasy but invaluable ally. Together, they pored over the documents Mark had handed over in court, the internal memos, financial records, and cryptic emails. "Look at this," Margaret said, pointing to a ledger filled with coded transactions. "These payments go beyond Karen. There's a whole network funneling money into the HOA accounts disguised as routine fees." John's eyes narrowed. "Who's behind this?" Margaret hesitated, then pulled out a folder marked Confidential. Inside was a list of names, board members, local businessmen, and a few unexpected faces. Among them was a powerful real estate developer, someone John had never suspected. "They want this community turned into a commercial zone," Margaret whispered. "The farm, the surrounding properties, they're all targets. Karen was just their pawn, used to destabilize you and others who resisted." John felt a surge of anger and betrayal. The very people he'd trusted to protect the neighborhood were conspiring to sell it out. "Then we expose them," John said, determination burning in his voice. "We take the fight to the HOA board, to the community." But Margaret shook her head. "They have eyes everywhere. We have to be careful. If they find out we're on to them, they'll come after us." That night, John's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "Watch your back. They know you're digging deeper." Paranoia crept in. Shadows in his home seemed to lengthen. Strange noises echoed in the night. John started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near his property, faces peering from behind curtains. One evening, as he walked back from the barn, a car slowed beside him. The window rolled down, revealing a stern man with cold eyes. "You're stirring up trouble, John," the man said quietly. "It'd be better for everyone if you stopped." John's fists clenched, but he stood firm. "Not until the truth comes out." The car sped off, leaving John with a chill that went deeper than the evening air. The next day, John and Margaret arranged a secret meeting with several concerned neighbors, people who had quietly suffered under the HOA's shadowy control. They shared stories of intimidation, unfair fines, and mysterious property sales. Together, they formed a plan to gather concrete evidence, build a coalition, and confront the corrupt board in an open community meeting. But the stakes were clear. Their actions had painted a target on their backs. As John locked the farmhouse door that night, he whispered to himself, "No matter what they throw at me, I won't let them win." In the silence that followed, the wind carried a faint chilling warning, a reminder that in this fight, trust was scarce, and danger lurked in every corner. The air in the small town buzzed with tension and anticipation as the day of the community meeting drew near. John and Margaret had worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and rallying neighbors who had long suffered in silence. Now, the once sleepy streets were alive with whispered conversations and furtive glances. The shadows that had loomed over the neighborhood were beginning to dissipate, but not without resistance. The night before the meeting, John sat alone on his porch, staring into the dark horizon. The moon hung low, casting pale light over his farm, the place he'd fought so hard to protect. His phone buzzed, a message from Emily, the brave whistleblower who had risked everything to help him. "Be careful tomorrow. They won't go down without a fight." John's jaw tightened. He had expected no less. The corrupt board members and developers weren't just powerful, they were ruthless. The community center filled quickly the next evening, faces old and young, wary and hopeful, packed into every corner. The air was thick with emotion, fear, anger, and a fragile thread of hope. John stepped up to the podium, documents in hand, and looked out over the crowd. "We're here because our homes, our community, are under threat," he began, voice steady but passionate. He laid out the evidence: forged leases, illegal rentals, secret transactions, and the deep corruption festering within the HOA. Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs grew louder. The crowd was listening, really listening, for the first time. Then, from the back, a voice shouted, "Is this true? Are we really being sold out from under our feet?" A woman stepped forward, trembling but determined. I was fined unfairly by the HOA for trying to plant a garden on my property. This explains everything. One by one, others shared their stories, exposing a pattern of intimidation and greed. The room transformed from a gathering of passive victims to a united front. But just as momentum built, the doors burst open. Karen appeared, flanked by two burly men. Her face was pale but defiant. "This meeting is over," she declared coldly. "You're all wasting your time." A tense silence fell. The men took up positions near the exits. John met Karen's gaze, unflinching. "No, this is just the beginning." Suddenly, cell phones lit up across the room. Margaret, standing beside John, held up her phone. "We've live streaming this meeting. The world is watching." Karen's eyes flickered with fury but also caution. The tide was turning. The crowd erupted into cheers, their fear replaced by courage. But even as the community rallied, John knew the fight was far from over. Powerful enemies still lurked in the shadows, and this victory was just one battle in a long war. As the meeting adjourned, John looked around at the faces illuminated by hope and determination. The farm, the neighborhood, their very way of life. It was worth fighting for. And this time, they weren't fighting alone. The days that followed the community meeting were a whirlwind. The live stream had gone viral, drawing attention far beyond the neighborhood. Local news crews arrived and whispers of investigation spread through City Hall. The corrupt HOA board was under pressure like never before. John felt a cautious optimism, but deep down he knew the danger hadn't passed. Late. One evening, as John reviewed documents in his kitchen, the phone rang. "The caller ID was blocked." "John," a familiar voice whispered urgently. "It's Emily. There's something you need to see. Something we missed." John's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "There's a hidden ledger, off the books. It details bribes, offshore accounts, and the real mastermind behind the corruption. It's worse than we thought." Before he could ask more, the line went dead. The next morning, John and Margaret met with Emily at a quiet cafe. She slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, bank statements, and coded notes, all pointing to a name that shocked them: Margaret herself. John's eyes widened. "Margaret? How is this possible?" Emily's face was grim. She's been playing both sides. Her warnings, her help. It was to control the situation, not stop it. She's the real power behind the scheme. John felt a cold pit in his stomach. The person he'd trusted most had betrayed him. Determined to confront the truth, John arranged a private meeting with Margaret at the clubhouse. She arrived calm, even amused. "You've done well, John," she said smoothly. "But you're out of your depth." "Why, Margaret? Why betray your own community?" John demanded. Margaret smiled coldly. "Power and money, simple motivations. You think I was protecting you?" "No, I was managing the narrative, ensuring the plan succeeded without losing face." John's fists clenched. "You'll pay for this." Margaret shrugged. "Try me." Suddenly, John's phone buzzed, a text from an anonymous source. "Backup is coming. Trust the community." John stepped back, heart racing. Just then, neighbors began arriving outside the clubhouse, led by Emily and several new faces from the meeting. They'd uncovered Margaret's double dealings and gathered enough evidence to expose her fully. Faced with the united front, Margaret's mask finally slipped. Realizing she was cornered, she slithered out, but the damage was done. The HOA board was dissolved, an emergency election called, and a new, transparent leadership promised. In the weeks that followed, John worked with the community to restore trust and rebuild what had been broken. The farm, once threatened by greed and deception, flourished again. One evening, standing beneath the stars on his reclaimed land, John reflected on the fight. It hadn't been easy. Betrayals, threats, and dark secrets had tested every ounce of his resolve. But in the end, the community's spirit had won. And as the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh earth and hope, John knew one thing for sure. No shadow could ever truly extinguish the light of a united neighborhood.